Hey, so speaking of the E equals MC squared, tomorrow night I have an interview with Roger Anderton, who was publisher of Einstein Was Wrong. So there's a crew of people out here that are just like mind-blowingly ahead of our minds the way it works, that are trying to disprove or add to Einstein's working theories of general relativity and special relativity. So tomorrow night I have an interview with him. So I'm going to ask him about the information is energy kind of aspect that you pushed onto that. I don't know if you know who he is, but I'm super happy that I get a chance to talk with him. I want to talk about magnetism, electrogravitics, and these different things of time speed of, we have a speed of light that's supposed to be the constant and the measurable apex of a certain known quantity of physics. But now they're saying that something can exceed that speed of light. So everything you've ever learned is kind of only bound by certain constraints until we learn more about how it operates. So everything with the synthetic DNA and the information, think about the quartz crystals holding information, but embedding synthetic DNA inside a quartz crystal in silica. Then you're like double layering on top of, if the quartz crystal gets shattered, then the synthetic DNA still is holding code. Like, how deep can it go? That's millions, if not a billion years ahead of us in technology to really get this to like we could plug in, plug out on a USB port with synthetic DNA. I mean, to seed it across the entire galaxy, then we're starting to get into sci-fi stuff. And then we look at everything that science fiction that you've ever watched is more of a documentary than it is truly could be in the future. It is what is. It's a documentary of different civilizations and how that information has been passed around. I think we're on the low end of the totem pole over here in terms of galactic civilization, type 1, type 2, type 3. I don't know. We don't even use our planet as a propulsion system to move us through the galaxy like others do. I mean, we're sitting back here on, caveman style. Yeah, don't get me started, man. Only language, numbers, and I agree. Hey, but I did want to talk. You said something about the glass spherules up on the moon. Like Douglas Vogt, I knew him, and he was a researcher that was very much studying this micronova event. And Ben Davidson does too, up at Suspicious Observer. Shout out, Ben. What up, dude? Douglas died mysteriously after he started talking about the hinges on the door being of the wrong caliber and some of the sites they'd chosen being in the wrong direction of the flow of the floods inbound. And he mysteriously died after releasing that last couple videos about those very same thing. Excuse me, the hinges were not up to spec. Like whoever was producing the hinges for the blast or the resistance doors, he's like, those hinges are not going to hold. Y'all just didn't design them correctly. So he had already seen them and knew something about them. So he was releasing information that was not supposed to be released to the public. But his whole thing in that moon mission up there was supposedly, now whether that we were able to breach the Van Allen radiation belt and send humans up there, or our history is wrong. And like you were saying, SR-71 and many of these flying wings and things, we didn't see for 50 years after that. So what if our robotics and remote technology was also 50 years ahead of where we sit now? Could they not have sent a remote vehicle up there to take samples and return it? Because at that point, where we had sat in the 1960s would bring us up to what we had in like 2010. We had that technology then where we could take some robotics up there and retrieve samples. They were looking for specific glass spherules that were ejected during that plasma / coronal ejection micronova where the entire sheath of the sun was fluffed off at one time. We see that on the planet too. We get the black matte layer is an indication of extreme burn on one side of the planet, the oceans evaporating, as well as everything on the planet burned on the side that it hit first. So there's a lot of remnants and fingerprints on our own terrestrial levels here, what they were looking for. And iridium, that's more from the cometary impacts, but that black mat layer as well as the glass spherules, but to indicate that the glass spherules were also found in certain quantities on the surface of the moon, which show that these same characters understand this cycle's back again. And whether it's this year with the onset of the grand solar minimum on a 400-year cycle intertwining with the 80-year Strauss and Howe declining, cycle and the reset of our currencies, or what is it? Somebody knows something's drastically about to change in our civilization, literally on our planet, on our world. Is this the first step into the cycle onset right now with the electromagnetic changes on the sun? Is this the first what we're seeing with these crop losses? And that's why governments are posturing right now to put in sort of, without telling the public, you're going to go into a rationing program. Now, they're going to blame it on a currency reset, but perhaps they need to ration food because, well, we're not going to be able to grow as much food. So which one's more palatable to sell the populace? We're not going to be able to grow as much food because the magnetic field on the sun's changing. Therefore, our jet streams are going out of their normal flows. And by the way, the cloud cells are going 2 to 3 degrees, 180 miles more northerly or southerly than they normally do. So that onward circulation's really like tweaking everything up to the Arctic Circle or down to Antarctica. And by the way, the plant and harvest dates, those just aren't going to work anymore. And by the way, add on to that, the hydrological cycle, like where it rains all the time, it's not going to rain in the same places. If it does, it's going to flood. It's not just going to steady rain. And by the way, other places are going to dry out. So, our crops are kind of toast for a minute here. Or these bad bankers, they collapse the gold market with their paper derivatives contract. We need to go reset the currency, and y'all are on rationing for a bit. Which one's easier to sell to the public? Because, Douglas, remember his last email, He's like, hey, you got to watch this video. I really did a lot of research. And I never heard from him again after that. And I was like, usually I'll write back to him after he wrote me these things. And I was like, yeah, I didn't understand that point, but then he never wrote back, and then he was gone. So he released something that he shouldn't have released, especially about the hinges on the doors and those locations being in the wrong side of the wrong mountain, on the wrong location of where the wave was coming from. So whatever he knew something too much, and he spilled it out in the public like he shouldn't have. So anyway, man, I'll leave it back to you there.
It wasn't just the little spherules. Supposedly they actually found evidence of, like, I guess electron burns or protons moving so fast that they scarred the crystals. Where when you look at it
those would be gamma rays too, yeah.
Right, you look at it in a microscope and you see all these scarring things that, in other words, it burped a big blast. And on the moon, they don't have all this rain and earthquakes and tectonics and, wind blowing to get rid of that evidence. So no telling what they found up there. But don't you find it weird that we've never cared, seemingly, about the moon other than possibly a way station? And even that doesn't seem to be very, important to them, or the consideration doesn't seem to be high to do that. It's all about Mars. And Mars is all the way out where? It's right next to the asteroid belt, where what are we doing? We're wanting to mine all of these rocks that are floating around in space. And you're not going to be able to do that unless you have a launching pad of Mars. And it does circle back into, other stuff. If you believe the Zachariah Sitchin version of his translations, there would have been a way station on Mars at a time when it was green and had water. And then, there's a reference to another time when they stopped there again and it's totally uninhabitable, nothing but sandstorms, So
that was post micronova that was focused at Mars after their last visit with the TM,
right? And there's no
before it collided.
Whatever happened there, it destroyed the magnetic field, and that's why there's only chunks of it in different places around Mars. But when you really look at all this stuff that we're doing, it does fit into not only terraforming the Earth to a some kind of ideal, but also moving off to Mars to be kind of a remote governing location. And the way that everything's being set up now, it would be all digital, all on the Internet of Things. And right now, even, I sent you I don't know if you got that, but it was a paper in Italy that's the first newspaper
I wanted to bring that up. Yeah, the
completely
first.
written. And we predicted that. We've been talking about how the websites were already using
I know
AI
Il
writers.
Foglio.
Right. And the movies are being written by AI. It's just on and on and on and on with the programming. It's no longer predictive. It's just plain programming at this point.
Yeah, so tell me, will you know the difference? Like, I'm sure we can find an English translation of the Italian articles that were given. So, I mean, what is that AI trying to tell us to get us to follow it? And that's the whole thing about it is manipulating us to get us dependent on it. So, what kind of stories are in this edition that's trying to get us more? I'm wondering what it really said about, hey, AI is the best thing since sliced bread. You know, I'm curious what the stories are all about in this edition.
There are few things you can count on in a major disaster. Having your water supply cut off is one of them. With the Alexa Pure Emergency Water Bank, you'll have months of drinking water in your home. Everyone else will stand in line waiting to get just a few bottles. It's one of the easiest, most affordable ways to store emergency water, and it takes up hardly any space. The Alexa Pure Emergency Water Bank includes one BPA-free liner, comes with a siphon pump for extracting water, fits just about any bathtub, large or small, fills quickly in 30 minutes or less, holds up to 65 gallons of water, and keeps water fresh for up to 16 weeks, holds about 2 months of water for one person. A person can generally survive without water for about 3 days. However, the exact amount of time depends on many factors, including age, activity level, and overall health. Don't gamble with your life and well-being. Being prepared is easier than ever with Civilization Cycle and Alexa Pure.
Because these same stories, because you keep talking about Mars, and you really can't go much further than talking about Mars and the collision of Tiamat and the Anunnaki and all these stories of old. Even the biblical references, if you're going to go further back into some of these Nag Hammadi scrolls and the Emerald tablets, and like there's so much history that keeps pointing to this thing, but boy, they have tried to bury this history. And it keeps coming back up again because people keep poking at it. And people want the truth. And innately they understand there's something deeper than just what we've been told and just believe it at whatever face value. It's not. There's something way further back in our past. And even 500,000 years old for the Homo sapiens sapien, like all these chapters of ice ages and interglacials. And like there's explanations for things that have come and gone on cataclysmic scales of planets colliding with planets. Now, for me, I understand like how things can repel in space. So the only way that one planet could, at least in our solar system here, one planet could collide. We can't literally because we're both charged the same. So if Mars were to come to Earth, it would repel itself. It wouldn't even have a glancing blow. The magnetic would be just like when you have two magnets on a desk when you were in kindergarten and you pushed one and the other one moved forward. And there's that magnetic, separation between the two. But if there was a opposite polarity body that came from deep space that was oppositely charged, at that point they could smash together, which gives credence to deep space objects on a very, very long 3,600-year orbit. Once you got outside of the heliosphere and you went way outside that boundary and you started to come back in, you would be, like, for example, decharged. You would have no charge. You'd have the opposite charge. And once you came back in, that polarity would be opposite. And then, how when you were a kid and you turn those magnets over and they snap together, that would be the exact same thing that happened. Now, through antiquity, these stories have been shared. And why is it in our modern world it's not? It's erased. So I give more credence, again, almost to every ancient myth, legend, and story, within reason, than I do to any kind of like modern explanation of, those were wacko ancients. They just saw like some big stars in the sky. It was probably a macronova, and they embellished everything because that's all they did. They had no time. They were sitting in caves and they just like made up stories about the old world. Like, you got to be kidding me. You don't do that for 40,000 years and sit around. We supposedly had 200 years or 400 years, and we went from the steam engine to a rocket ship, and they sat around for 40,000 years and twiddled their thumbs. Like, that just doesn't make sense. None of history makes sense unless you're trying to obfuscate and bury it and rewrite it. At that point, it makes sense where we sit right now with this linear thing. Otherwise, the stories of the ancients make far more sense on this a circular or a cycle, and the cycle is back. Time is up on this planet, and that's what I'm saying. My seventh sense has kicked in recently, where a lot of things I've been doing or working on, I'm just like, why? Why am I doing that now? We're at the end of the time. We're at the end of it. The end of one cycle, the end of one world, and the new one's beginning, right? It's like, how do you hop through and kind of navigate from this transition period here, whatever is the short one that we're going to go through the currency reset, into this longer one, a middle of, 2050-ish, 47, something like this. This grand solar minimum offset with the food production losses are really starting to hit. This year we'll see a 4 to 6% grain loss across the entire planet, every grain. I don't care if it's rice, if it's sorghum, if it's corn, or if it's wheat. We're all completely across the planet looking at about at least 4% minimum losses. That's going to continue to increase next year and the next year and the next year. Like the maximum amount of food we ever could produce on the planet, we've rolled over that. Some people were talking about peak oil back in 2006 and 7. Well, what about peak grain production? I think we're there already. So it explains a lot of all this, like everything that's overlapping right now of all this vast amount of change. Like we haven't seen this much change in hundreds of years. And it's all overlapping right now on top of each other in unison on top of the changes that we're seeing naturally. So if it is true that there is some sort of cycle coming back and some sort of elliptical orbit thing, and why is all the gold being like consolidated in 3 or 4 locations on the entire planet? Like that's a pickup spot for me. Just as much as you mentioned Walmart, where you consolidate everything and load it in the trunk and you're out of there in 5 minutes. I see nothing different. Humans are no longer necessary. We're coming to the next chapter of it. And this, saving of the DNA and encoding all human knowledge, that is, people maybe have the wrong idea of the Library of Alexandria. Perhaps the Library of Alexandria fits in a shoebox and it's a crystal with the times prior of your synthetic DNA in that crystal. We're so used to being brainwashed that a library is physical books laying on a shelf. Perhaps that was the code that they had duped us with many thousands of years ago. That still lives in the royal palaces. Whoever holds that knowledge of the ancient world, it only needs to be this big. We're talking about long, long past history and advanced knowledge and advanced technology that's disappeared.